It's an incredible full circle journey right now. When we first came out to Oshkosh, my brother and best friend and I, we were sleeping under the wing of a plane. We were eating at Friar Tuck's every night. We were selling our little magazine from a card table, and it was like $3. And so it was as humble as you could get. Now to be here and you're watching F-18s and F-4Us flying in formation, and they're talking about Tom Hudner and Jesse Brown. It's really proof that if you stick with something long enough and if your heart's in the right place, you can still make it in this country. It was a real gift to see a story you love that had been largely forgotten, and that's what the Hudner Brown story was. It was forgotten. It was from a forgotten war. Tom was a very quiet hero, very humble, and he just wasn't in the spotlight. And to be able to take that and unearth it, and then see it become a major motion picture, that you attend an event and people are using their names again and they're talking about the Korean War, that's the biggest thing. The Korean War has a name and a face again. Devotion really got started when I got an email one day from a young actor named Glenn Powell. And Glenn was at that time doing stuff for Netflix, but he wasn't the Top Gun Maverick movie star he is now. And he said, I want to play Captain Tom Hudner. I want to make this movie. And I decided I had to test him because I had to figure out how Hollywood is this guy. Because, Hollywood people talk a lot. And so I said, Glenn, do you want to meet the real Tom Hudner? And I was waiting to see what his answer would be. If he said, oh yeah, someday. He said, when and where? I said, how about next weekend? And next thing you know, we're sitting down with Tom at his kitchen table while Tom's wife is making us waffles. And I got to watch Glenn work with Tom and interface with him and learn about him. I said, okay, we've got our actor. All right, Glenn, how do we get this thing made? And he said, I know an amazing family, the Smith family. Molly and Rachel Smith are movie producers, and their dad is Fred Smith, who founded Federal Express. And he was a Marine in Vietnam, and he knows this story, and he loves this story. They're the ones to do this. Tom knew that the movie had the wheels had begun turning. He knew Glenn. They stayed in touch until his passing. Tom died about 4 months later after meeting Glenn. So we got to him just in time. And Glenn, it was so special for Glenn because he got to look into Tom's eyes. He got to hear his manner of speaking. He got to study his mannerisms. So if you're going to become somebody, you got to know him. So I had the unique experience that authors normally don't get, and that is the chance to look at the script. Now the advice you give and the changes you make, there are suggestions. Nobody has to listen to you, but they listened to me a lot, and I was very fortunate. And so it just came from decades of, being around warbirds and knowing how pilots talk. And so I just make little notes in the script, and I got to make 2 rounds of suggestions. And then I know before the movie went to film, the Brown family got to look at the script. I think they were really reassured because the portrayal of Jesse was very sacred to them. I mean, this is a young man who gave his life at age 24. And so there's something very special. He did not get a long life, and so this movie was going to be his legacy. And so it speaks a lot to the movie producers that they put it in front of them. When Glenn Powell steered me to Black Label Media, and I met Rachel Smith, and I came to know Mr. Smith at the helm of FedEx, and who was closely involved in this process. Mr. Smith paid for the whole film. See, he knew Tom Hudner. He knew of the Chosin Reservoir. Mr. Smith was a Marine in Vietnam. He led a rifle company, K-35, very famous unit from World War II. He led in Vietnam. He did 2 tours there, Bronze Star, Silver Star, 2 Purple Hearts. He lost 2 of his platoon leaders. He was in heavy combat himself. And one time he told me that his NCOs, gunnery sergeants, would tell stories of the Chosin Reservoir. Some of them had been there. It was legendary back in the 70s in the Marine Corps, in the 60s. And so those were the heroes of the Vietnam Marines. And so this story was like in his DNA. So he paid for the whole thing. So at the very beginning, I introduced the producers to Steve Hinton and Karen Hinton and the Planes of Fame Air Museum because I just had a great relationship with them, and I also know their body of work. They're the best movie pilots in the business. And to their credit, the producers, Mr. Smith, Rachel, Glenn Powell, went out and visited the museum. And next thing you know, I'm seeing pictures of Glenn climbing on a Corsair. And they said, these are the people to work with. And so there was really not a question of will there be CGI aircraft or real aircraft. They meshed with the Hinton family from the start. and there was no turning back. This was going to be 100% real. And I also introduced him to Mike Oliver at the Erickson Air Museum. Great guy. He had actually painted his aircraft to look like Jesse Brown's before there was talk of a movie. So this was very organic. He had read the book and they believed in the story. So I said, you've got to also work with Mike. And it turned out that Mike was an incredible film flyer. Before that, I don't think he'd flown in any movies. By the time they're done with it, Kevin LaRosa and the other stunt pilots on the set are telling me, hey, Mike Oliver is made for this stuff. So Mike really awed a lot of people in his performances. The whirlwind that is the Devotion film really started in full force in the fall of 2022, but it's going strong. It's keeping steam because it went to streaming. And so a lot of people who stayed home from the theaters are now watching it that way, and they're also watching it again and again and again, and word of mouth is traveling. So this movie is really in its early legs of its life, and I'm hearing tremendous news. When I've done some talks at AirVenture, they'll ask the audience, how many of you have seen this film or read the book? And the hands that go up, we're talking 95% of people have seen it, but they want more, they want to learn more. And that's how I know we did a great thing. The Korean War is back in the forefront. So when I was writing the book, I got to this part where Tom Hudner says to Jesse Brown, as Jesse is pinned in his aircraft, in his last moments, Tom says, we'll be back for you, somehow, some way. And the next morning I called Tom and I said, hey Tom, did you ever make it back to North Korea? You see, at the time, Tom thought maybe they would be back for Jesse that night, maybe the next day. You know, maybe we'll get a bunch of Marines and we'll go up there to recover his body, or maybe he'll still be alive. You know, he was just full of, it was desperation at that point. But he did say to Jesse, I'll be back for you. So I asked him, did you ever go? He said, no, my military career never gave me the chance. I said, would you go? He said, in a heartbeat. So we maneuvered and we found the right fixer, person who can get you into North Korea. And this woman had worked with the North Korean army. So it's very unusual. Most people don't get to go in and work hand in hand with their army, because we were going to look for Jesse's remains. But it turned out that as soldiers, they had deep respect for Tom Hudner. They had respect for him coming all that way at age 88, from Boston, Massachusetts to Pyongyang, North Korea, to keep a promise. And in fact, Kim Jong-un gave a message to Tom Hudner. He said, you know, they said the Marshal Kim Jong-un respects how far you've gone to keep this promise, and he pledges the Korean People's Army will help you look for Jesse Brown. We weren't able to get to the crash site that time. The monsoons had scrubbed the mission, but the North Koreans invited us back. And they said, let's complete this mission. So Kim Jong-un knows the story of Jesse Brown, and he wants to see this guy come home. The pandemic changed things because the whole world started to lock down. And so the mission is still ongoing. So I'm often asked, how can you go back and find Jesse Brown and bring him home? Well, there was a twist of fate that saw his remains perhaps survive that encounter. What happened was they sent some VF-32 aircraft back with napalm to give him a warrior's funeral, a Viking funeral. But the napalm wasn't working well. They had used so much napalm in the chosen reservoir that they had to start using drop tanks, jury-rigged with incendiary devices. And they weren't going off. It was kind of like every other one would work. And they dropped those on Jesse's aircraft. It didn't go off. So then the guys had their iron bombs. And they're like, they couldn't bring themselves to drop iron bombs on their friend. It just was no longer a warrior's funeral. So they dropped the iron bombs on Tom Hudner's aircraft, and they left Jesse's alone. Where was Jesse's remains? Where did they end up? Since then, we've discovered that story. I didn't even know it when I wrote the book. So there are these bomb craters on the mountain, and we've since put together a team that's really researched this story, and we've looked at the latest satellite imagery, and we believe that those bomb craters are still on the top of that mountain. And we've since learned that a lot of times, where would an MIA American be buried, an airman? They'd be buried usually near the crash site. If in Southeast Asia, if an F-4 pilot or an F-105 pilot went in, if there's bomb craters nearby, the farmers would often put the remains in the bomb craters. We believe that's where Jesse is. We believe a North Korean farmer came up there the following spring, put his remains in a bomb crater, covered it over. Now, nearly 70 years later, the landscape has taken hold. Where's the aircraft? Well, the North Koreans repurposed just about everything. I mean, that's valuable aluminum. So Jesse's airplane, it's probably pots and pans, it's probably rooftops in those little mountain villages around there. So that's one of the things when we went back in 2013, and another thing I want to do when I go back, I want to go to some of these villages and ask where the pieces of this aircraft are, because I bet you there is navy blue painted metal in those North Korean homes. So for me, the movie became very real when I started getting photos of them painting the aircraft. They were up in Washington State, and suddenly there's these big white Ks appearing on the tails, the symbol of the USS Leyte. And so that gives you chills, because when you've worked on a project for more than a decade and you see it coming to life, it's special. Then they invited me to the set, and they said, do you want to do a cameo? We'll make you a sailor, and you can stand over here with a broom. And now they said, what do you want to be? And I said, can I be an aviator? And they said, sure, we'll get you a G2, we'll get you a flight suit, come on down. And so we went, my brother and I, my brother Brian, who worked on the book with me, he's my researcher, we went to the airfield, Statesboro, Georgia. They took an old Air National Guard base, and they said, okay, we're gonna be able to use this runway, and they built this incredible set there. We went into the trailer, and they did our hair, made us look like we're from the 1950s, slicked it over, and we put on our flight suits and everything, and we walk out as the sun is coming up, and we see this site that we hadn't seen before, and that is the superstructure of the USS Leyte. They had actually built an aircraft carrier on dry land. They built everything from the deck up. They turned the runway into a deck. They had the gun tubs, they had Vulture's Row, and they had the bridge of this aircraft carrier. So we would climb the ladders and we would go into the bridge, and here's glass windows, and when you would tap the outer surface, this thing you thought it might be fiberglass, it's made of metal. And that just brought the thing to life. So suddenly they're taxiing the Corsairs by, folding the wings, unfolding them. They were taking them off from this thing. And so, it was just a commitment to authenticity. And it was sad to see that they had to destroy that set, because it'd be the best tourist attraction in the world.